Hi and welcome to the channel. Today we're looking at Howtown to Mardale Head, which is stage 10 of the Lakeland 100 and stage 2 of the Lakeland 50. So let's get straight into the elevation profile. Okay, this is the elevation profile for Lakeland 100, stage 10 and stage 2 of the 50, Howtown to Mardale Head. It's a one up, one down, and then contour around the edge of Haweswater until you get to Mardale Head car park. I say it's a one up and one down. For me, this is probably the most energy sapping climb of the entire race. It's mud track. If it's wet, it can get very slippy. And there's quite a few false summits as well. You think you're almost at the top, you crown out and, look up and there's still more to go. Bampton Common can be a bit confusing if it's not a clear day as well. But then it's down to Haweswater, skirt round the edge and into Mardale car park. And as usual, we've got the flattened out elevation profile to give you a more realistic view of what you're going to be facing on the day. And as usual, we've got the Ordnance Survey flyover. Okay, so here we go with the OS flyover. You leave Howtown and head up Fusedale. And I don't know if you remember me saying that it takes about an hour to get up Fusedale. That starts from here. There's a little bridge across the beck. That's where I started the timing from. This is pretty decent track, but it starts to get steeper here, and it's mud track. So as I said, if it's wet, it's slippy, and it can be difficult to get up. It gets boggy around about here. You've got a beck coming down here, and this is the last sort of climb out of Fusedale, and here you're almost up at High Street, and you've broken the back of the climb up onto Bampton Common. It's pretty featureless up here. You might need to look at your GPS a couple of times. If it's cloudy on the day, which is going to be July, so I'm hoping it's not. If it's cloudy, it can get a bit confusing, but hopefully we'll have a clear day for it. And you begin to drop down off Bampton Common here. And as you hit this point here, you will also hit, it wets out a bit here as well. Through the ferns, down to Haweswater, edge around Haweswater. And that's approximately where the battery conked out and I missed the change. And at this point you know that you're roughly at Mardale Head car park. And from here on in you can actually see the checkpoint. Empty your water bottles and get ready for a refill. Okay, notes for this stage. The first thing that I have to do is say hello to Lily May, who's the granddaughter of one of the channel viewers. Hi Lily, hope you're well. The second thing to point out is this is the second longest stage. For me, it's one of the hardest stages because of Fusedale. And mentioning Fusedale, some of you will know, some of you won't know. It's a very long, drawn-out climb. I've done the numbers from when I did this stage back in January, and from the bottom of Fusedale to the top took me about an hour. Some of you are going to be able to do it a lot faster than that. Some of you will be around about the same mark. Some of you are going to be a little bit slower. But yeah, it's a long knackering climb with a lot of false summits. But if you've got the hour mark in your head, you'll know that, yeah, with the false summits, you are roughly near the top if you're at the hour mark. The second thing to say is mile markers. As I'm sure you figured out by now, what I'm doing is I'm taking the course mile markers from the GPXs that are available on the internet, and then what I'm having to do is scrub backwards and forwards through my video to try and figure out where those mile markers sit, to give you a decent reflection of where you will be on the course. The problem with this stage is Bampton Common. there's virtually no landmarks up there whatsoever. So all the mile markers on Bampton Common, taken with a pinch of salt. There could maybe be up to maybe 300 metres either way or the other. The one thing that you don't get to help you out with either is on the video with the GoPro, you don't really get any sense of depth perception. So when it's a completely featureless terrain like Bampton Common, it's quite hard to figure out just exactly where you are. Another point to note, I missed the second battery change. I had my headphones on. I missed the beep, so there's about 1.5 kilometres of footage missing as you're going around the edge of Haweswater. You don't really miss anything. It would have been better if I'd have got the footage, but you haven't missed anything important. It's just 1.5 km of technical rocky track around the side of Haweswater. And the last thing is the car park at the end. I don't know if anyone else is having this problem, but my Insta360's been playing up no end. Every time I hit record, and I think it's because I move the camera too quickly, it almost sort of like throws its dummy out and says I don't like the memory card. I've checked the memory card, all the speeds are right. It does, from looking on the internet, it does seem to be a common issue that a lot of people are having. So the footage at the end that I normally record when I get into the CP and say this is here and that's there, that's missing. So I've left the GoPro footage on so you can at least see a bit of video footage. I'm going to put a map on the end so you at least know what the run in and run out of the CP looks like. So let's get into the video. As promised, here's the overhead for Mardale Head Car Park, which is CP10 of the Lakeland 100 and CP2 of the Lakeland 50. I don't know what the setup's going to be this year. Last year there were 2 stations, food and fluid. The food was marquee, the fluid was a water bowser. It's a straight in and out. So yeah, in, get your food, get your water, and then out, and you're straight into the climb up to Gatescart paths as soon as you leave the CP. So that's it for this edition. I'll see you when we do stage 11 and stage 3. Take care. Bye.